All right, my name is Alex Fish. I'm a council member here in Culver City. I'm going to keep this very brief since we're starting late. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Randy Shaw, the executive director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic and author of the recent book, Generation Priced Out, Who Gets to Live in Urban America, I think is the subtitle.
Right.
And it's generating a lot of discussion. I think everyone will find something provocative about tonight's talk. So thank you very much for being here in Culver City, Randy.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Again, it's fun for me to be in Culver City because, as some of you may have read, my father practiced dentistry here at the Washington 24-hour Medical Clinic, right off of, Bundy, off in Washington Boulevard. We used to buy fireworks here because they were illegal in Los Angeles. And his property taxes were much less than across the street, which was Los Angeles. So always had fond feelings, went ice skating regularly. I went to, I was very sad. I know the rink sign is still there. I understand it had to go away. But I went to University High School, so I'm from Los Angeles and from the West Side. And how many people here are from, or live in Culver City or from Culver City? Because I'm talking about Culver City. Good, I want to make sure people care about Culver City. Because, my book, I have a chapter on Los Angeles, which really doesn't get into Culver City. So, the book has a lot of great stuff on Los Angeles and its housing crisis. But there's a connection. Now it's not going very well. Okay. That's good. Okay. There's a connection. And what I do write about in the book, which I think is very analogous Culver City, is Highland Park. People here know Highland Park at all? Because, if you grew up in LA like I did, first I never even went to Highland Park until recently, and you said, well, Highland Park really needs to worry about gentrification and upscale transformation. You say, well, what are you talking about? Highland Park? No one wants to live there. That's why it's so poor, heavily Latino. And of course, what happened, and it's a function of the overall LA misguided housing policy for decades, is since 1970, LA added 1 million people, and they built hardly any housing units. So people who would never imagine living in Highland Park found themselves priced out of nearby neighborhoods. Couldn't live in Los Feliz. Los Feliz was cheap 15 years ago. So you start saying, well, where can I afford to live? And the realtor says, well, what about this place, Highland Park? It's got all these nice old craftsman homes, beautiful craftsman homes. And what happens in the space of literally like 5 years, Highland Park goes from a very low-income community to what NPR on the Marketplace show describes as the national poster child for gentrification. Now, let me ask anyone, how much luxury housing development was built in Highland Park to cause that gentrification? Because you know that it's common fiction, widely disseminated in public, and you know what I'm talking about, that the cause of gentrification is luxury housing, or any market rate housing. But nothing was built in Highland Park. And I would say the same thing's true with Culver City. There wasn't luxury housing development here in Culver City that caused home prices and rents to escalate. It's Culver City not building housing. After I knew I was going to be speaking, I thought I'd get some facts about Culver City, and I saw in 2018, in the whole city, only 69 housing units were permitted, and of those 69, 55 were single-family homes. That means that Culver City only built 14 units of multi-unit housing in an entire year during what been a construction boom in much of the state. So think of this. I'm sure you've thought of this, and this isn't news, but you're bringing in all these jobs with the tech industry, Amazon, Google, and all that. You're adjacent to Santa Monica, which has their tech industry. You're adjacent to LA, which is adding jobs. And people working in the jobs in Santa Monica and LA can also live in Culver City, right? And you have a transit line. So if you don't build any housing, what is that going to do to rents and home prices? It's foreseeable, isn't it? So the interesting question, and this is true, I write about over a dozen cities in my book, why are we letting this happen? Why did we let it happen, and why are we letting it happen? Why are we still letting it happen? I write about city after city. I mean, San Francisco, where I'm from, is a really serious bad offender. But Berkeley, Austin, Denver even has an issue. I mean, New York City, you can go city after city that all had rising populations starting in the late 1970s as what we used to call yuppies, young urban professionals, began returning. Remember yuppies? And the thing about yuppies is that it wasn't a one-time deal. It wasn't like, oh, there just had to be a certain generation, grew up in the suburbs, they came of age in the late 70s, they all want to move in the cities, and then by the 90s they're moving back to the suburbs. No. What we've learned about American history from the past 2 decades is that the age of suburbia is an isolated and unique historical phenomenon. That historically people with money always gravitated to cities. The jobs, the educational opportunity, the cultural opportunities are all in cities. And then after World War II, when cities were in decline, our highway system, our federal government subsidized a massive suburban expansion. And the folks growing up there don't want to stay there. So young people wanting to live in cities started in the late 70s, and it has continued unabated to this day. So given that we know that, why aren't we building housing for this population? Well, if you've read the New York Times this week, you'll see something that I write about a lot in my book, and I've been talking about really nonstop since the book came out in November, the evils of single-family home zoning. If people saw the New York Times last Sunday's lead editorial, sounded like my book. And then Emily Badger's story in yesterday's New York Times about how you can't build housing in most cities because the land isn't, you can't build apartments because the land is overwhelmingly zoned for single-family home only. I often hear from people, the same people who say market rate housing is evil, is causing gentrification. They also say, well, we should only build affordable housing. Have you heard people who say that? We should only build affordable housing. Forget the fact there's no money for it, but they want to believe that everything's fine as long as we only build affordable housing. So I say, okay, well, in San Francisco, where are we going to build it considering we have only 2/3, 75% of our land, you can't build an apartment? What's their answer? There's no answer. Let's change the subject. Greedy developers. Just keep chanting, greedy developers. And this is what's got us. And, I look around the room, my friend Gary here and Barbara, and we're all boomers. And we're to blame. I'm sorry to tell you that, fellow boomers, we're to blame. Boomers, when you go to a hearing on land use, you support housing or more density, it's the boomer homeowners who are saying, nope, keep things exactly as they were when I moved into my block. And I have the God-given right to decide who lives in my neighborhood. You know where that started, by the way? My hometown, well, my current hometown, Berkeley. In 1973, Berkeley passed the nation's first neighborhood preservation ordinance. Now, is anyone against neighborhood preservation? Right, that's a good idea, right? And after all the redevelopment of the bulldozers in the 60s and the ill-conceived urban renewal plans, neighborhood protection and preservation, preserve neighborhood character, that's the way to go. Great idea. But what did that turn into? Well, I went back in the book and checked out the 1973 preservation ordinance, which was done by many progressive officials. And they were making comments like, we want to make sure we don't get stuck with ticky-tack apartments in our neighborhood, i.e. the apartments where the UC workers can afford to live. Right? That's what ticky-tack apartments are. And what's happened in all the cities I write about is that neighborhood groups, primarily boomer-dominated, particularly in Los Angeles, feel like we have the right to determine who gets to live in our neighborhood, what gets built in our city, and we don't want apartments because tenants are of low character. Now, I describe in the book a situation in Minneapolis on a video that I saw where I heard these homeowners. One of them broke down and cried about this project going on across the street. Does anyone here on Twitter go with Wedge Live? You should. It's hashtag Wedge Live. Does great videos. I have it, and I have the link in the book. But anyway, people are saying, who's going to handle all the 311 calls? Who's going to deal with the mattresses left in front of the place? And I'm thinking, is this a drug rehab center or a prison halfway house? And I find out it's a 10-unit market rate apartment building in a neighborhood that's 80% renter. But I also talk about a woman what's happened is tenants are seen as destroying neighborhood character, when in my experience, tenants are the ones doing the work to build the neighborhood character. So what has happened to us, especially when if you go to a neighborhood like Los Feliz, which is single-family home only now, or many of the neighborhoods, you'll see fourplexes everywhere because they weren't illegal then. Because in those days, they used racial covenants to stop the people they didn't want from living in their neighborhoods. Once they couldn't do racial covenants, starting in the 1960s and since that time, in the 70s and 80s, it was economic covenants. No apartments. That'll keep the riffraff out of other races and tenants. So that's what we've done. And what is astonishing to me, and I describe my book as a call to action, my book is about the progressive cities. I'm not writing about, and I'm not talking about Atherton. I don't talk about Beverly Hills. I don't talk about Palo Alto. Cities that don't claim to support diversity, who want to be elitist white enclaves. That's their agenda. That's their mission. But why is San Francisco, Los Angeles, a place like Culver City, 25% Latino even now, why are our cities following these reactionary elitist and racist policies? That's really the question. And it really gets back to the entitlement that boomer homeowners feel. I mean, you know that in Los Angeles, where Mike Davis referred to them as the Sunset Bolsheviks. You know, the big homeowners on the hillside who they want the government to... They're not free market, these millionaire capitalists. They're not free market, these big homeowners. They want the government to stop you from building anything that isn't a single-family home. So when you can only build single-family homes, and you add, like Los Angeles did, 1 million people, which affects Culver City and Santa, all the area, prices are going to go up. And then we're going to have everyone bemoaning, oh, it's so sad, a teacher can't afford to live in these cities, nurses, firefighters, first responders, none of us can afford it. Well, we created that. And you know what? We can reverse it. Culver City can build more housing. You know, I came in from the airport. I drove down Sepulveda. Usually I go a different way from the airport. I went down Sepulveda. I'm driving down Sepulveda from the airport, and I'm thinking, is this really every unit's like one story? I figured I didn't, I had to be watching the road, but I did calculate. I think you could build about 10,000 housing units just between the airport and Sepulveda and what's your street? Linsblade. I mean, there's so many building sites. The parking lot for the former ice rink could house 500 people. So here's the question I have for people. We'll get into this. Why aren't we doing it? Now, you might have read, they say the donkey kicks hardest when they're in trouble. Down in Southern California, they're actually making it hard to build housing. We had a bill in the Sacramento legislature, SB 50, which created... The LA City Council voted unanimously against. Why? It destroyed local control, because the locality is doing such a great job providing affordable housing. God, we can't let the state get involved. That doesn't make sense. And I think we have to really dig deep here, because this is one of those issues where it's so easy to do nothing. I always sort of make fun of the Berkeley homeowner who drives a Prius and has their solar panels and make sure they compost on the street. We have door-to-door composting that they pick up every week, and they feel they've done their part. But of course, they're not letting apartments be built anywhere near their neighborhood. So there's 120,000 people commuting from Sacramento, where it's cheaper to live, by car to Berkeley. I did an event in Fremont. The guy said he works with 45 people in his division at UC Berkeley. None live in Berkeley. Many are driving to work. So it's great you're doing your compost, We also, wait, to be fair to Berkeley, wait a minute, we banned plastic utensils at fast foods. I mean, come on. When the State Air Resources Board did their status report last November on the progress we're making to our climate change goals, they said we're not making them. Why? Too much driving. But the people in Berkeley, keep your head down, don't let anyone build an apartment, and we won't look at I-80 where all those people are driving from Sacramento. We won't see that. We externalize the climate change crisis that the boomer homeowners are creating. And so it's not only an affordability issue, it's a climate change issue. And it just doesn't make any sense for us to continue going in the direction we're going. And I think Culver City has a very special opportunity. Because I've been to cities I've been to all these cities, and what often I hear from people, like in Boulder, we don't have any place to build. Of course, Boulder was fun because they said to me, Randy, you got it all wrong. We don't need to build more housing. We have to stop creating jobs. No, right. If you stop creating jobs, people don't come to your city because they can't get work. One problem. There's one problem, big problem with doing that in Boulder, Colorado. What is the biggest employer in Boulder, Colorado? They're exempt from local law. Can't stop the university from employing. So I said that to him. I said, well, how are you going to stop the University of Colorado from hiring? He goes, well, we'll have to deal with that. Go back and put his head in the sand. Boulder and I have this in the book, Boulder has really gone in the wrong direction. But, I have some optimism. I've seen what's happening in Austin right now. Austin, big tech center. Anyone ever see the movie Slackers? Couldn't be made today in Austin because if you're a slacker, you can't afford to live there. Austin's very expensive. And in my book, I talk about this very sad 3-year process to try to bring increased density. Austin homeowners are like your Sunset Bolsheviks. These folks have had enormous power. After World War II and the GI Bill happened, they rezoned their neighborhoods so they have to have a 4,000 minimum lot size, 4,000 square feet. Why? So African Americans returning could not use a GI Bill in those lots. That's Austin. But there was an election last November in Austin. You had a candidate for mayor who's pro-housing but kind of scared. He actually broke off 3 years of discussion on increasing density because he said the city was being too divided over it. So he rewards the divisive people by backing off. He ran against the head of the neighborhood groups whose whole theme was Austin for Austin people. It's these newcomers. You've seen those signs. They're all over America. Keep Austin for Austin. We have to, are you sure you have people in Culver City who feel like, let's not worry about the newcomers. It's the people who have housing we have to be concerned about. So they had the election, and I knew the mayor would win, but I thought it'd be close. He wins by 40%. And when there finally was a citywide election and not a Thursday afternoon planning commission hearing that only the boomers can have time to go, when it was a real democratic process, the housing people swept and control a majority, and Gregorio Cesar already passed this Affordability Unlocked. Citywide, you can do 6 units that are 50% affordable, and the city is going to subsidize the affordability with a bond. So, Austin went from disaster last July to triumph now. So Culver City can do it. Culver City can do it. Before I break for questions and comments and discussion, I do want to mention, anyone here from Santa Monica? I have to tell you, I've been praising, I grew up right at the border of Santa Monica, hung out at Sand and Sea Club at Santa Monica when it was there, spent a lot of my time. I've always extolled Santa Monica. I say good things about it in my book. Always said, God, great progressive city. Then I hear about this airport. And I thought maybe it was in Ripley's Believe It or Not that progressive Santa Monica that says they care about low-income and working people could have I know the airport well, the 227-acre airport, and decide to turn it into a park. You know how expensive it is to live in Santa Monica? It's way more expensive than Culver City. And those millionaires want to build a park for their own playground when working people, the people who work in those hotels and restaurants, need places to live. That's just outrageous. And so how do these people get off calling themselves progressive when they're denying housing opportunities? One of the things I say in the book is you got to use public land in these high-income areas for affordable housing because it's hard to get sites. I write about a site that's gotten a lot of attention in the New York Times recently and a lot of other publications called they call it the Elizabeth Street Garden. And I just want to tell this story because it's so emblematic of why we were in this housing crisis. So in the early 80s, a site is picked for affordable senior housing. But as typical with government, the money isn't there and all that. And then finally, in 2009, the site starts moving. And in the meantime, they leased it to a guy who does architectural sculptures. Everything in the place sells for thousands of dollars. It's like giant outdoor ornaments. And he was using this lot set for affordable housing to store his stuff. He finally gets word, hey, you know that affordable housing in Nolita, upscale? Now it's upscale Nolita. It was not up north of Little Italy, very expensive neighborhood. The affordable senior housing is moving forward now. What does he do? Landscapes the whole thing and renames it the Elizabeth Street Garden. Beautiful garden, not open to the public, only when he says it's locked unless he lets you in. And here we have these wealthy village folks, gobs of money, houses in the Hamptons, some of the wealthiest people in New York, live in that village area, West Village. And they want to turn it into a park. And they don't care if it's senior housing. They say, we need green open space in Nolita. And I described the battle, and why are we going to win that battle? Because something happened that almost never happens in progressive cities. A city council member named Margaret Chin said, no, we're building housing. They ran a candidate who'd never been involved in politics against her. And in these council elections in New York, the incumbent always wins. This guy got 48% of the vote. Why? Margaret Chin was stubborn, wouldn't work with the neighborhood, i.e., she was insisting that a site that's been set for housing for 30 years actually get built. Most elected officials, as I described in other cities, including San Francisco, they hear their neighbors, those homeowners opposing not affordable housing, they're taking a walk. Not the right site. Great project, wrong location. We've heard that before. It's always a great project, always the wrong location. Never the right location. So anyway, we can do better. We have people like Alex on the city council here who, you got to elect the right people. We've learned that. But we can do better. And I believe that Culver City is a better city if it's more diverse. And it's not moving in the direction of Palo Alto, which is an elite white enclave. I don't think that's what Culver City people want. I don't think that's why a lot of you who are here now moved to Culver City. You wanted its diversity, and it's a fight you can win. So I'll leave you with that. Take questions, and I hope you will buy the book because there's a lot of good stuff I couldn't get to in this 20-minute introduction talk. Thank you. In the back room. Oh. I have to go to the mic. Okay. Well, you have to come to the mic. I thought I had a mic, yeah.
Hi, Randy. Couple of things that you failed to mention in your talk here, and thank you for being here. When you mentioned the corporations coming in, you failed to mention that they're also coming in, not with jobs, but with thousands of employees who are coming in, taking over neighborhoods.
Yes.
We have a lot of houses being built in Culver City right now, but it's all $3,500 for a one-bedroom. And what's happening is we're not holding the corporations accountable for housing their employees who they are plopping down on our community. Another thing you failed to mention also is our vacancy rate. We currently have 231,000 vacant housing units in LA County.
Well, let me deal with this. I don't want to get off on a tangent.
Sure.
Those vacancy rate numbers are irrelevant and misleading, and they keep being repeated by people often. I'm not putting you in this category who don't want to build new housing to say we have all these vacancies. We have an extraordinarily low vacancy rate. The definition of a vacancy is whether an apartment is available. And people float these numbers in all these cities. Oh, San Francisco supposedly has 100,000 vacancies. Well, how come whenever there's an apartment available, there's a line? So the corporation issue, which has come up again because Google just gave $1 billion. Look, I write in the book about Oracle, goes to Austin. Well, here's what happens. Family housing project in Austin, tenants get all these eviction notices. They can't have rent control in Austin because Texas law, like most states, 34 states ban rent control. You cannot enact rent control. Now it's 33 states because Oregon just went the other way. You can't have rent control. So all these low-income families right on this nice lake are all forced to move. What does it become? The Oracle campus. And I said, wait a minute, Oracle brought all these employees. Why didn't they ask Oracle to provide some housing? And the real question is, I look at the cities. Because we have all kinds of businesses opening. Bank of America opens up something. A stadium opens up. It's up to cities to say, we want you to build. Apple is interesting because Apple's been criticized for what it's done in Cupertino. The Cupertino City Housing, now that Apple wants to build housing, the Cupertino City Council doesn't want them to build it. If you want to, you guys know about Cupertino? Yeah, okay. If you don't know about Cupertino, the best line about Cupertino was the planning commission who said that the reason she doesn't want to build this 2,500 unit complex, it's a privately 50% affordable, privately, no public funding, but 50% affordable. It sounds a great deal. Is it's going to bring prostitutes to Cupertino because we know the people living in those places are men. She said that. Look it up online. It's true. So I think the question is, I look at cities to demand these corporations build the housing. So,
thank you. You just made my point.
Yeah. But you know what? I was going to say something about that. Some cities, I understand, don't have leverage. But when I look at Austin, at the same time that Amazon was getting all the publicity about the New York City thing, Apple was planning to add 10,000 jobs in Austin. Now, Austin did not need any of those jobs. Austin's overwhelmed with tech. Austin had leverage. It's a failure of city government. You got to elect people like Alex here. People who hold. Seriously. It really comes down to you have to have elected officials who are willing to say, hey, okay, you're bringing 10,000 people here. We don't have a supply. What are you going to build? Yeah. Let me go to another person though, because go ahead. Yeah.
Are you suggesting that public money should be used to build housing?
I've been suggesting that, my whole life, actually. Yeah, in fact, we wouldn't have a housing crisis. One thing, when I have these discussions, realize that the major tenant crisis in the United States of people who are too poor to afford rent, it's 75% of households eligible for federal housing assistance don't get it. Just think for a second. In 1949, we passed the National Affordable Housing Act, and we say the United States government has a duty to house all Americans, which we've ignored. Richard Nixon decides in the 1970s, we're not going to do public housing anymore. We're getting out of the public housing business. Ronald Reagan decides to so decimate the HUD budget in 1981 that to this day we've never come back from 81. And then people wonder, why are all these homeless people out there? God, why do we have all these homeless people? Well, maybe because when 75% of the people eligible for federal housing assistance don't get it, what is the alternative to homelessness? It's pretty obvious. But I'm talking about we can't even house middle class people anymore. Teachers who aren't eligible for federal aid, we can't even house them. We used to be able to. 10 years ago, people say, Randy, I wish you wrote your book 10 years ago. I said 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been a book. Seattle wasn't super expensive 10 years ago. Portland wasn't. Minneapolis wasn't. The whole bit. Yeah.
So my question is kind of based on previous.
Microphone.
Sorry about that. So my question is kind of based on the question before. So you started talking about cities. So it got me thinking about the fact that, and this is a larger question and a larger issue than just Culver City, but it affects all, it kind of boils down to, and that is that people are moving to cities, mostly coastal cities, East Coast, West Coast. So what can we do to try not to have all these people move here? Not in the sense. Well, what I'm saying is the Midwest is suffering because all these people are leaving. You have these towns that are shells of what they used to be.
I quote someone in the book, a real anti-housing person in Berkeley, who said, "Why don't all these tech people just move to Idaho?" Well, they're not moving there. I mean, I just told you, Apple, they moved to the places where there's already a lot of tech. Right. And you can't change that. You have no power over that. And I think this is the important point, and I've said this many times. How is that going to get teacher housing? The service workers at Berkeley, the UC Berkeley, UCLA, Santa Monica College, they have to be right there. These jobs aren't transportable. There's so many jobs that are in the place, that restaurant workers, that even if you take out the Amazons and the Googles and those things, the affordability crisis would be there because the population has still gone up. I mean, we had a tech boom. The dot-com boom, which totally changed the San Francisco real estate market forever, started in 1997. Prior to 1997, most of the neighborhoods in San Francisco were already gentrified. Prior to 1997, before tech ever arrived. So it was really the fact that San Francisco's population, and we're added 100,000 people since the last census, San Francisco, and they're all added. If you look at San Francisco, because of zoning restrictions, because nothing got built in the whole west side of the city where Golden Gate Park is, if you know part of San Francisco, 100,000 people all basically came to what they call the ring neighborhoods, the Mission, South of Market. Okay, so you got to build more housing. No way around it. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to just say what I'm really speaking of is the Amazons that say we're going to go to New York City when the rest of the country could really use those jobs.
No, I agree with you. They went to Alexandria, Virginia, but they're going to a place where they feel they have a workforce that can serve their needs. They don't feel they have that workforce in Montana. If they did, they'd be there. I mean, there's the realities of business, and they just don't see it. That's why they keep. I mean, why does Austin keep getting more tech companies when they can't even house? They have such a bad crisis as it is. Let's let her go. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks for being here. Culver City has no legal rental protections, and this Monday the City Council has agreed to discuss the possibility of a temporary rent freeze. And I'm just wondering, I'm all in on building more. I want you to talk a little bit about maybe how rental protections and density can kind of come together and why those things are important together, because I think there might be sort of a false dichotomy that these two groups are against one another.
Well, that's because of certain people who are misinforming other people, and we know who those people are. But here's the deal. This Michael Weinstein guy is unbelievable, but not to mention names, but here's the deal. Rent control is the foundation of stable communities. When to me, just cause is a moral issue. I don't believe someone should have the right to tell you to leave from your home for no reason. I mean, that's just a core moral value. The fact that we don't have a national just cause eviction in this country makes no sense. And we had a statewide just cause bill this year that I thought with SB 50 was going to be a package. A lot of corporate interests who have never been involved with rent control signed off on this deal. And then our governor disappeared and it fell apart. There needs to be statewide just cause. And the rent control, people say, why is rent control so important? And I tell this story all the time. If you're in a neighborhood and you don't have rent control and you want to work to improve the neighborhood, you're always afraid, wait, if I make this neighborhood better, I'll be evicted. And someone who pay more money will move my place. In my neighborhood, where I work, the Tenderloin, which is the lowest income, the only neighborhood in San Francisco that will never be gentrified. It's true. Never be gentrified. We protected it, and I have a book on it called The Tenderloin, Sex, Crime, and Resistance in the Heart of San Francisco, which tells a story of what we did. The most active people in the neighborhood are tenants, because they know they never have to worry about being evicted, and they can put their time in improving the community, fighting crime, beautification, the whole bit. They're also very pro-housing. We support every housing development. So the problem with this density issue, people say, well, we don't want this market rate housing because it's going to cause the eviction of adjacent tenants. And what I don't understand about Los Angeles is you have rent control in Los Angeles, so why are we saying this? It's not true. In some places where you don't have rent control, I can see why you'd find adjacent new structures threatening. So what Culver City needs to do is a threshold measure before you make Sepulveda turn into the Champs-Élysées of Culver City. I'm into Sepulveda. I'm going to be following you guys because I'm telling you, that could be your Vienna. That's your Marais district. That's your Paris, Sepulveda, 20 years from now.
But here's the thing. You have to get the people living in the area who are tenants to feel like they want to put the energy into it and investing into it because they're safe from being evicted. And, I'm friends with a lot of landlords, a lot of landlords in San Francisco. And, they all live fine with the rent control we have. They all live fine with it. And they will tell you, you probably landlords, some of you may be landlords here, landlords. They'll say, I never want to evict a tenant for no reason. I would never do that. Well, but the thing is, there are some people who do. And, the fact that the real estate industry won't even go after the bad apples like that, that's just a sad comment on their moral values. I'm sorry to say, the greed is incredible. I used to be very involved in Sacramento politics. I got some very big bills passed when John Burton was state senate leader. I used to be down in Sacramento all the time. And I'd see the realtors. We were negotiating with them. And for them, it's just, I mean this really seriously, it's not only just money, it's a game of needing to win. It's not like they have members calling up says, whatever you do, don't let there be just cause eviction. It's like, if we let them get just cause, next they'll go after the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins. So we got to stop any minimal change. But again, we have not done a good job, those of us who care about these issues, in making sure this happened. We let our governor take a walk after he said he was for just cause eviction. So we need to be a little more attentive and more alert. But boy, it'd be a great shot in the arm to the entire state if we could report that Culver City has moved forward. It'd be great. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Maybe could you also address what I hear a lot when we mention density, when we are hearing density and building way more. Yeah, but it's impossible. We can't move anymore. Traffic is going to be a huge
I'm glad
problem.
you brought that up. That's right, because I was saying that when they did the poll, I talk in the book about in Austin, did a door-to-door canvass to educate people on this rezoning plan. Found out the overwhelming concern in Austin was traffic. And the people who are concerned about more housing, well, if we build more housing, we want to cause more traffic. Has anyone ever heard that argument? And what is astonishing about it, as I mentioned during dinner today, is that, okay, so then you'd explain to the person, well, you have all these people who are living way outside on the border of Boston because they can't get housing near their jobs, so they're driving in. If they had housing near their jobs, wouldn't that reduce traffic? And hey, yeah, it would. But, here's the thing. Here's the thing is, it's kind of like with people not really recognizing that their entire city, you can't build apartments. It's just like this view that more people means more traffic. Instead of realizing not if you build it where there's access to public transit. That's why that whole SB 50 concept of building housing on transit corridors. And the LA City Council gets completely hysterical because the hysteria is really about is homeowners not wanting tenants anywhere near them. And yet you have progressive Mike Bonin, for example, joining that crowd. And, it's really sad to see. But the traffic, do you think LA has a traffic problem, right? I see the traffic problem in LA, and then I see, so I was in Silver Lake, because I was here for the LA Times Book Festival, and I stayed in Silver Lake, and I thought, Silver Lake's really nice, but it's like a speedway. You're going down Sunset, and it's like, you have these outdoor eating areas, and there's six lanes of traffic. And I thought, why don't they take off one lane and put plants or parklets, just have a break so when you're eating outside, you don't have a car going by or parking next to you. And I talked to some LA people, maybe you guys sure have some opinions on this, and they said, oh, can't do that in LA, car is king. Bike lanes, nope, no bike lane. It can't be, it's not sustainable. I remember very vividly, when I was in junior high school, at Webster Junior High here in LA, some of you might know. When I was at junior high school, did you go to Webster? Oh, great. I was at Webster Junior High School, and we used to have a subject, should LA build public transit? My father was adamantly against public transit. Why? We're not like New York. We don't have a downtown. Anyone ever heard that line before? Now you have a downtown, though. But so what did LA get by refusing to build public transit for decades? So what I always wonder when people say that these things like the traffic is bad, what's their plan for getting it better? Okay, so we'll cut Uber and Lyft. We'll let them do less. That's an issue. They're blaming Uber and Lyft for increased traffic. Okay, that's one issue. But I don't see a solution. If you're not going to do bike lanes and public transit, and you're going to continue to increase population, and here's the important point. If you're running for office in LA, and you said, hey, we have too many people in this city. We shouldn't build any housing. We have to keep the immigrants out. Would you get elected from a single district? I don't think so. You wouldn't get elected in San Francisco or anywhere. Well, what we're saying is we're happy to have the immigrants come in. We're not going to find any housing for anybody. It doesn't make sense. And then we read the stories of people commuting an hour and a half or 2 hours, terrible LA commutes, the worst, as bad as there are anywhere. And we don't say, yeah, but we've got a street like Sepulveda in Culver City that could have 5,000, 10,000 units, and they could walk to work or take public transit. Why aren't we doing that? And when Scott Wiener, a senator from San Francisco, has a state bill to do that because the cities aren't doing it, it's like, we need local control. So it's a completely irrational, we've caused, due to an irrational policy, great hardship to the millennial generation. Boomers are fine if they bought their place at the right time, right? Or they rented under rent control at the right time. But millennials and the like are out of luck. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, go to the microphone.
I'd just like to get your opinion on school districts are now getting in the game of housing. I believe there's one near Daly City, Jefferson, that is building
San Francisco is
housing for teachers and
San
actually
Francisco.
any employee of their school district.
Yeah, San Francisco has the same thing. I'm very big on that. I have that in the book. I mean, here's the thing. We want our teachers, both my daughters are public school teachers in San Francisco, and we want our teachers to be available after school to do clubs. We want them to do parent-teacher conferences after school. You know, kids are having problems, sponsor coach teams, and then we're going to make them drive an hour and a half to where they can afford to live, in Sacramento. And that's what I mean about when people say we only want to build affordable housing, but teachers earn too much for most affordable housing programs. Yeah. So when you're saying we don't want any market rate housing, you're saying forget teachers, forget nurses, forget anyone with a middle class job. So it doesn't make sense, that argument. Thank you for bringing that up.
I agree with you on making the population more dense, especially along Sepulveda. But one of the realities is, and I think this with cities all over the country, where they're kind of stuck because they don't have much money themselves, and they've sort of mortgaged their future into paying pensions for public employees that have built-in rate increases, et cetera, so they don't have much wiggle room in terms of actually funding this kind of growth. This is my understanding of it.
Well, actually, see, this is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sure.
Now, here's what I would say, though. This is the genius of upzoning. Doesn't cost any money. It's free. You could have legalized apartments all along Sepulveda, everywhere in Los Angeles, everywhere in California. You could have had fourplexes. It didn't cost the government a dime. The government would make money because of the increased development. So what we're doing, you're right, in fiscally hard times, even more reason to increase density, because it doesn't cost any money. When we're talking about subsidizing the rents of the 59,000 homeless people in Skid Row in LA County, that costs money, a lot of money. Increasing density costs no money. So why are we not doing it? It's because we've allowed the boomer homeowners to strangle the political process. I mean, I don't want to say nothing. I was telling folks during dinner, when I was in high school, Paul Koretz and Zev Yaroslavsky were still involved in politics. I mean, how about some new blood here in L.A.? These old folks' ideas aren't working.
No, so the follow-up to that is that, do you think a change in zoning, for instance, along Sepulveda, would be enough of an incentive for for the owners of those buildings to actually build 2, 3, 4, 5-story buildings.
Absolutely, there's a demand for it. And here's the irony of it, because people say, like the Scott Wiener bill, which would have allowed 6-story buildings, which only in L.A. are called high-rises. I mean, there was a picture that Koretz's people were putting out of a 45-story building. The limit was 6. But so you have a 6. So here's the deal: is you in Culver City, have a citywide 56-foot height limit. Now, my neighborhood, which we downzoned in 1985, it used to be unlimited high-rise development, allows 8 stories. 8 stories is fine. I don't know why you have to have 56, but you need to have some bigger projects, 56 feet. Do people know that Culver City has a citywide? Oh, yeah. But here's the thing, is that developers have to build enough units to make it economically viable. So when people say, so there would be a lot of building. That's why Weinstein spent all that money to kill the bill, because he doesn't want anything built anywhere. He wasn't, if they weren't going to build anything by increasing the zoning, he wouldn't have cared. So that's why, like, you think about it, why are we doing this? Who are we benefiting? And, I had a video, you could check it out if you go to, if you follow me on Twitter at @BeyondCron, you can follow me in everything I do. And I had a thing with NBC News that was on, you might have seen a video, where I spend 2 minutes explaining why single-family home zoning is so bad. And what I say in that, is what I also say in the book, is the biggest people profiting from the existing system are boomer homeowners, because they're if the best job you can have is be a house in Noe Valley in San Francisco, you earn $60,000 a year and you don't have to go to work. Just sit there, do nothing, don't paint anything, don't fix anything, just let it sit, and it's worth $60,000 your equity the next year. So these folks are thinking, like, I don't want any more housing, because then there'll be people competing, more supply. Best to limit it. So if you want to live in Noe Valley, there's only a house that comes on the market every few months, and the bidding starts. There was a house in Berkeley near the BART station, somewhere near 1,200 square foot house. It went for $1.5 million, and there were 55 offers. That's madness. This is the world, but great. It's great if you own it.
Yep, it sure is.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming today. I was wondering, in the last couple of years, when the state started allowing people to convert their garages into ADUs, has that had any significant impact in increasing housing stock?
It actually, depends how you define significant. I would say yes, the numbers, because so many neighborhoods across America do not let housing of any type getting built, ADUs have been a positive addition. But, your hillside homeowners, your Sunset Bolsheviks, they were opposing that too. And, in city after city, these ADU things, legal challenges, Washington tried to do a state ADU bill, which got stopped. So Seattle's trying to do their own one. Even ADUs, and, I was in this in-law unit. It's called an accessible dwelling unit. Here's the thing. I was in this event. I was doing a keynote speech at this conference down in Irvine, and the housing policy chief for Anaheim was talking about ADUs. He goes, well, we don't have a problem with ADUs. Just, of course, they have to be owner-occupied, or else you get into that duplex problem. The dreaded duplex. We got to keep them out of Anaheim. Can you believe that? Why do ADUs have to be owner-occupied? The duplex problem. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciated your points, and I just wanted to see if you could expand on. I would have to get on my tippy toes here. If you can expand on the economics or the process that you think that just building any type of housing in Culver City, we've only been seeing luxury housing, will trickle down to the low income and the middle class, who these are the families that are being displaced because the rent is so high.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Okay, perfect. Because
yes.
I couldn't put it in, put it together.
I'm so glad you brought up that question, because it's another thing that Michael Weinstein and his crowd continue to talk about, and people in San Francisco do as well. They say all we get is luxury housing, and if you look at Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, New York City, those cities in particular, most of the housing gets built is luxury housing. You know why? Because that's the zoning allows it. You can build a 30-story building in downtown, whereas we've not allowed apartments to be built in most of the city. So where the more affordable housing can be built, it's barred by zoning. People always say, well, wait a minute, but all the housing seems to get built downtown. Right. That's because the zoning prohibits it everywhere else. I mean, let's be thinking this now. And, this idea that every market rate housing, she uses the word luxury, and I discuss this in the book, because a study was done, if you define luxury homes as homes that sell for over $1 million, in 2017, a study was done of every transaction in San Francisco, 95% of luxury homes sold were existing housing. New housing was cheaper because it's multifamily, multi-unit. It's not a single-family home in San Francisco. So this is what this really a troubling disinformation campaign goes by, where people say every time anyone builds anything that isn't subsidized by the government, it's luxury. It's not. It's not. Facts are, and it's like the phrase "greedy developer," where LA Times did a poll last October. People say the biggest problem with the housing costs are greedy developers. And people made a big deal about it. Oh, well, people don't want housing built. And I said, no, look, if you interview a boomer homeowner and say, who's responsible for the homeless, who's responsible for the high housing costs? Is that homeowner going to tell the pollster, I am? It's greedy homeowners like me? No. The poll is obviously self-serving. Blame somebody else. But most housing built, it's a factual thing. It's cheaper, the new units, than the existing units because they're multifamily. They're multiple units and end up being cheaper. That's why, and also in San Francisco, and here's the other thing. San Francisco, we have inclusionary housing. So you could build, whatever you build, at any income level, a percentage is going to be affordable. Now, the LA folks, LA City Council, local control, we all oppose SB 50. Does LA have inclusionary housing? No. These folks in LA, I don't want to defend LA, but I don't get it. They know better than the state. They're mad at SB 50, not enough affordability. Developers are allowed to build without affordability. But wait, your own city you can build without affordability. Explain that to me. There's an exception with these TCO projects, but I'm talking about the basic project. No affordability requirements in LA. There's a linkage fee, but that's not an on-site. So I don't get why LA isn't just doing it if it's so vital, or is that just an excuse to not pass a state law? Yeah.
I have a two-part question. Part one is, could you explain inclusionary inclusionary zoning, because I don't know if everyone here knows what it is. And secondly, what do you think is the optimal amount of affordable housing that would be required?
Well, inclusionary housing is when you have to have a percentage of either have a percentage of your units affordable, or you have to pay a fee to the nonprofit would build the units. And, there's a lot of, debate about does inclusionary requirements impose too stiff a burden and deter housing and all that. I'm a big fan of inclusionary housing, a very, very big fan. And I think you have to have it. The percentage really is based on studies that cities do. San Francisco is now at 20%. Many cities are at 10%. But I'll tell you, I'm friends with a lot of builders, and their big complaint isn't with the inclusionary. It's with the delay process. In San Francisco, it takes 4 years to go through the process. In San Francisco, you can write it. Any person can write a check for $617 and hold up any development project for 3 months minimum. Just write a check. You don't have to live near the property. You don't have to know anything about the property. Just write a check and submit it with an application. And delay. Now, why do we allow that? Our mayor did a charter amendment to change that. You might have heard about this week. Mayor Breed is very pro-housing. did a charter amendment to say this is crazy. We can't have these obstacles block affordable housing. And our progressive board of supervisors all opposed it. We didn't get the 6 votes, can't get on the ballot. Why did progressive supervisors oppose it? Because they're chained to the luxury homeowners who want to appeal everything. The most appeals, you think appeals come from the Tenderloin? No. Appeals come from the wealthy homeowners who don't want their neighbors remodeling their kitchen. We actually have legislation pending in San Francisco that allows you to challenge a conditional use. As you know, the phrase conditional use is a very expensive process, higher level. A conditional use application if you're going to expand any room by more than 10%. Gary, didn't you expand a room by more than 10%? You're in Culver City. You're safe. You know, 10%. You want to give neighbors the right to challenge through a conditional use process enlarging your kitchen? That's where it all started in Berkeley in '73.
I saw a map today of Culver City which shows how much of the city is zoned R1, which means one unit of housing on that lot. Right. And it was so astounding. It's just
it's true all over
so
the country.
much.
And then we wonder why we don't have enough housing.
Right. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about, you talked, I forget if it was Minneapolis or Minnesota in general, that they made a change and allowed more per lot.
Minneapolis got rid of exclusionary housing last November. Oregon, before the end of the month, is going to vote on a state bill, HB 2001, which would eliminate single-family home zoning in the state of Oregon. Let me, not to make, I want to leave on it. I want everyone to feel upbeat on this thing, but just a little bit of, here we have California. We have a supermajority of Democrats in the legislature. We're all progressive. We're always telling everyone else we know better than other states. We're so democratic. We're so great. Oregon started this year with a statewide ban on rent control, which they not only overturned, they imposed rent control and statewide just cause eviction in Oregon, where they only really have one big city, Portland. I know they have Bend, I know that, but we have San Diego, we have San Francisco, we have Oakland, we have a lot of big, San Jose, and we can't even get anything for tenants in the legislature? That's sad. That's sad. But Oregon now, we couldn't even get SB 50, which legalizes fourplex, that's a lot. Even Marin's represented. Marin County, Marin County, they supported fourplexes statewide. And we couldn't even get a vote in our state legislature with a supermajority of Democrats. Whereas Oregon's going to pass this. Austin did its thing. Single-family home zoning is on its way out. But it's like other things we do with climate change. We either can keep delaying and keep having the problem getting worse, which we're doing a good job at. Housing isn't getting any cheaper that I've seen. Except in Seattle, where they're building double the housing of other cities. It is getting cheaper. But we keep doing the wrong things, and we get the same wrong results. But one thing about single-family home zoning I want everyone to understand, because there's been a lot of publicity about it. I talk about it all the time. But let's be very clear about something. As great as it is to get rid of single-family home zoning, you really have to increase density across the whole city. What got less publicity in Minneapolis, they upzoned so many parts of Minneapolis. Seattle's done a big upzoning. So it's great to have fourplexes, but when you have the gap in housing in the hundreds of thousands of units, you need bigger projects than fourplexes. So I'm all for it, but that's the tip of the iceberg. And we shouldn't be dancing in the streets. What I want to see along Sepulveda is 6 to 8 story buildings, just like the Champs-Élysées in Paris. You go to Paris, all these boomer homeowners, they go to Paris. Oh, I love Paris. I love the street life. They go to Vienna. Vienna's amazing. You ever see a single-family home in any of those places? They're all 6-story units, 6-story height limit in Paris. Everybody loves it. And we come back here and says, no duplexes.
I want to ask you more about publicly owned housing.
Yeah.
When it was asked, you say you're in favor of it. You talked about the federal government and HUD. But are there any examples, or do you have any thoughts about why even say Culver City with our its budget reserves couldn't maybe get something going on Sepulveda, or more importantly, the state of California, the city of LA.
I'll tell you something about public housing. It's interesting because if people hear from DSA, they're always talking about we need public housing. They could have renamed it social housing. We haven't built a unit of public or social housing in the United States since 1955. but they've seized upon that as like, that's all we should build. And then, of course, the existing public housing we have in America has not been funded adequately, and it's in crisis everywhere. So for a lot of political reasons, there was a shift to having private nonprofits build and manage affordable housing instead of the government. Why people are so enamored with the government of the United States running housing is not clear to me, because we've done a terrible job. And even when Clinton was president, he demolished 100,000 housing units under the Hope 6 program and didn't replace them. Bill Clinton. Democrats had a majority, ran everything from 92 to 94, and they passed that thing. So, I mean, I don't know why it's so popular, but Culver City must have nonprofit housing development groups who could build. But the money, many cities feel the money isn't there, and it is true that there's not money because HUD is deeply underfunded. And Jerry Brown didn't believe in funding affordable housing. So 8 years of Jerry Brown, we got no funding at all from the general fund. Newsom's put some money in, but then let me just, because I want to finish because we're going to be over soon, but one thing I want to alert all of you to, when you read or hear Gavin Newsom added $2 billion to the housing and homeless budget, do people hear that? And everyone's all excited. Well, just think of this. You guys passed in LA a $1 billion thing for the homeless, and it's going to create 7,000 homes. That leaves 52,000 more people. So $1 billion isn't very much money in California. California needs $25 to $50 billion to meaningfully address its homeless crisis, not $2 billion. So that's why it's going to have to be from the federal government. We don't have the money. And we can do increment. I run homeless programs. We house a lot of people. We house 2,200 people. Pay rent for another 800, so with 3,000 people we sort of house. But we still have 8,000 people who are homeless in San Francisco, because you need a staggering amount of money, and you have to build a lot more housing. Let's do these last two, and then I don't have time for the book signing, because hopefully you guys will buy the book.
Sure we will.
I haven't...
Hi. You're talking about how sad it is, and people are stuck in their cars, and we're in traffic, and we need billions and billions of dollars. But deep in the dark web, there must be a reason why California has not done this. And for some dirty little reason, do we have any idea why underneath...
As I said, it's very simple. Well,
simply money and boomers?
No, well, wait a minute. I mean, we didn't have a homeless crisis before 1982 in this country.
Okay.
And what a coincidence. Just as urban cities are gentrifying, the federal government gets out of the housing business. So there's a very clear cause and effect, and we've never spent the money to deal with homelessness. So, I mean, and until this year, no presidential candidate or president has even proposed it. Elizabeth Warren's $3 billion plan, a very ambitious plan, and other candidates have done stuff as well. But even when we had Obama and Clinton, there was not a meaningful increase in funding. Sad to say. So the money never came.
Okay, so that's the sadness.
Big money never came. And in the zoning, I mean, the reality is that many of the communities I talk about weren't really like Culver City. 15 years ago, if I were here, there would be no one in this room. What do you mean Culver City's got a housing crisis? 15 years ago, everything was cool here. No longer. Last question, then I'm happy to, again, thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for being here. Some of your ideas, I think, are fantastic. Some of them I have disagreements with. One that I wanted a response on is, the idea of statewide just cause. I used to be a manager for an apartment building, 30-unit building, rent-controlled here in Los Angeles. It's under just cause. There was an individual used to smoke in the unit, trash, throw trash on the ground, things of that nature. I would say not illegal activity or anything of that nature, but just cause made it very, very difficult to remove a tenant that was probably 90% of the complaints in that building. On top of that, there was one other individual, only 2 times that I really encountered having, dealing with just cause, was an individual, non-payment of rent, something very straightforward. But in practicality, they were able to use the court system after a 2-month break. They ended up dragging out for 6 months afterwards. I'm sure you've heard that before. I'm just interested in
whenever
some
I
of that.
hear that someone dragged out a non-payment of rent, I used to run an operation in San Francisco that dealt eviction with those cases. The landlord did something wrong, because it doesn't take 6 months unless landlords. I've had cases where landlords said it took 6 months. Well, yeah, because they didn't do it right. They made mistakes over and over again. But Here's the thing about Just Cause.
Just to say it was an independent, it was a mom and pop, it was their only building.
Yeah.
To say that they're a very sophisticated group of people, I would,
Well, if their own property, it's worth a lot, they should hire lawyers. But here's the thing. I frequently hear, and the opposition to Just Cause is always about, we have this nuisance tenant, we couldn't get him out. My organization is not under rent control, but we impose Just Cause on our own because it's fair. And we don't have any problem evicting people. We evict more. I mean, my organization I think we used to evict more people than any other organization in the city. Because when you have formerly homeless people, often they lose their benefits. And even though we have all kinds of ways to get benefits, and also some people, they have a policy now in San Francisco that they prioritize people who have been on the street for 10 years. When you've been on the street for 10 years and you spend a couple months in a navigation center and you come into one of our hotels, doesn't mean you're functioning. And those folks often have problems. But I haven't found that problem. And then I'd also say about Just Cause, you can tell me any law we have, and I can say, yeah, but I know you said freedom of speech, but this happened and that didn't seem fair. I mean, that's just how things are. You don't penalize the vast majority because we think of a few examples where the law may not fit. So let me leave you with that. Pass Just Cause in Culver City and rent freeze. And again, thank you all. Again, you can find me at Beyond Cron on Twitter. And I'm happy to talk afterwards and sign copies of the book afterwards very much.